us as we go on. In addition to that, we would like you to please join the SQL Coding Series Slack channel, SQL Coding Series channel under our Data Science Slack channel, and ask your questions so we can keep the engagement and discussion going on there. Just one reminder again, please set your chat to everyone so that we get to see your comments. Everybody get to see your comments, your questions, and we can keep the discussion going. So at this moment, I would like to hand over to our facilitator for today, Astha. Astha, please, over to you.
Thanks, Jesse. I'll share my screen. See, can you stop sharing so I can share my screen here? Thank you.
Okay, I just did that. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 4 of the SQL series. I'm so excited to have you all here today. Just some housekeeping reminders. We have this amazing team here with us to answer any of your questions. There is a Q&A box that you can type them in as you go along. So you don't have to wait till the end of the session to ask your questions. You can put it in the box as we go. And then the recording of this session will also be available, so you can revisit any concepts later as you like. So up until now, we learned about SQL syntax, operators, and commands like group by, order by, aggregation functions, and case statement to manipulate and get answers to business question. And we did lots of hands-on as well. But we've been doing everything so far with just one table. Today, we learn about joins. This will help you do the same exact things to answer questions. But this time, you will be able to use information from 2 or more than 2 tables. So that means you can answer even more complex business problems now. We'll begin by understanding different types of joins here and the syntaxes, and then we will get to the hands-on part where we'll get to apply everything that we've learned up until today and then everything that we cover today as well. So let's get right to it. Join. What's a join? A join is a clause that is used to combine rows from 2 or more than 2 tables based on related columns between them. So here on the screen, you can see 2 tables. The one on top gives you detail about an order. It gives you an order ID, which is unique, customer ID, for which customer places that order, and then the date of the order. And the table underneath gives you the details about the customer. So you have a unique customer ID, you have their name, a contact name, which seems like a shortened version of the customer name here, and then you have the country. So if we want to join these 2 tables, the first thing we want to see is, do they have an ID column, which is common between the 2? We always want to join on an ID column. So the common ID I see here is customer ID that is present in both tables. Now let's take the first row as an example to see what a join will do. You have an order ID here, 10308, and this was placed by customer 2 on September 18th, 1996. This is all the information that I can get from this one table. If I want to get more details, this is where a join can help me. A join will say, okay, this customer ID 2 is also present in the second table. From there, I can also tell more information like this customer who placed the order in 1996, customer 2 was Anna from Mexico. So that is how we can use join to link and get more information from 2 tables or even more than 2 as we'll see today. Let's look at the different type of joins that exist. The first one we have is inner join. The image on the left depicts that this join depicts what this join does in the form of a Venn diagram. So you have 2 tables, table 1 and table 2. The intersection, that's the green area, that is the highlighted portion, which represents what you will get in results after performing an inner join on these two tables. So effectively, what you get in the result is only those rows that are common in both table 1 and table 2. Let's look at an example on the right here. You have a customer table with customer ID and their first name, and you have an orders table with order ID, amount, and customer ID. So customer ID is the common ID column on which you will join. What is returned to you is the result table on the bottom over here. And you can see that the information returned to you is of customer 3 and customer 5, which existed in both the tables. So the 3 and 5 highlighted here and the customer 3 and 5 highlighted here. So this is an inner join. And here you have the syntax of an inner join. So let's break it down. So far, everything we were doing was a select from, and then we would select the table. When you're adding join to it, you will just name the type of join here. So here we have an inner join. So you have select, let's leave the columns for now. You have select from table 1, then you do an inner join on table 2. Now the notation here, this basically represents the common ID on which you're joining table 1 and table 2. For example, in our last slide, we had customer ID in both the tables. And this is just a notation that we use in SQL. So from table 1, if I want to pull any column from table 1, I will write it as table 1 dot and then the column name. And same thing for table 2. So any table's column is represented by a dot and column name to pull it anywhere. So it's just a select from the table, inner join, the second table, and then what column you're joining it on. This is the common ID. And then over here, you can list as many columns. So if I want to pull columns from table 1, I would always I would say table 1 dot, whatever columns I want to add, and then table 2 dot, same way. We'll see more of this ahead. Next is the left join. In the left join, it'll return all rows of the first table. Think of it as a table on the left. But from the second table, you will only get information on those rows whose ID is common and present in table 1 as well. So you can see this from the green intersection here. Everything from table 1, but in the intersection, I only want the common things. So let's look at an example here on the right. You have the same customer table and order table that you had before. Here, customer table is table 1 and orders table is table 2. In the result after left join, you get all rows from table 1. That is the customer's table. That is also the table on the left, as we can think about it. But look at the amount column in the result over here. This is pulled from table 2. And the only rows populated with values for this are customer ID 3 and 5, because these are the only IDs from this table that existed in table 1 as well. So everything that's pulled from the left gets populated from the right, only the common values get populated. And this is the exact same syntax for left join as we saw for inner join. The only thing that changes here is instead of inner join, you would call it left join, and everything else stays the same. Next is the right join. This is, as you might think, exact opposite of left join. It returns all rows of table 2, that is the table on the right, as you can think of it. And for table 1, you only get information on those rows whose ID is common and present in table 2 as well. So for table 2, everything. For table 1, only those that are common and intersecting. Let's look at the image on the right for an example for right join. This is the exact same example as before, but now since we are doing a right join, we get all rows from table 2, which is the orders table, which is table on the right. So the amount column that we pull from orders table is fully populated in this case. But the first 2 columns that we pull from table 1, that is the customer ID and first name, these are only populated for the common ones. So customer 3 and customer 5, we have coming in because they exist in orders table as well. And we are pulling amount from orders table. So that just everything gets populated from there. And the syntax, exact same thing as we've seen before. Only thing changes is the right here instead of left and inner that we saw before.
Hey, Astha, sorry to
Mhm.
stop you. We have a question. If you go ahead, might be a little tricky for you to explain.
Okay,
So, someone has asked, why isn't the order ID brought into the left joins final table as well?
let me go to left join. This order ID.
Yes, it says why isn't the order ID also brought into the left join final table as well?
You can bring it in. You can bring it in. This is just an example. So, for example, I decide to bring order ID. How I will bring it in is by listing the table name dot the column name, which is the order ID. So you can bring it in. The only thing that'll happen is it'll get populated over here for customer 3 and over here for customer 5, and everything else will be null. So you can, this is just an example, but the result will be whatever columns you bring in. Okay. So yeah, we did the right join. Next, the outer join. So outer join, this does not give preference to either table 1 or table 2. We get all rows from all the tables. So like you can see in the Venn diagram, everything's highlighted, we're getting everything. And wherever there's no mapping on the ID column, which you join on, you'll get null. So you can see that in the results, but let's look at this example in detail. Let's look at this first row, right? So you have the amount of 200, amount we are pulling from the orders table. So what SQL will do is it'll go here and it'll say, okay, I pull the amount. What's my customer ID here? It's 10. Let me go here to the customers table and see if I have any customer with the ID 10. I don't. So when I pull a customer ID and first name, there's nothing there. So it returns a null to me. Look at the second row. This is the case where we have everything. So amount is 500. This maps to customer ID 3. Let's go to the customers table. Do I have a customer 3? Yes, I do. And it's for David. So everything gets populated here. And the other example is the last one that's different from the first two that we saw, where you have a customer ID and first name John. So SQL will go and say, okay, I have customer ID 1, first name John. Do I have anything for this customer on the orders table? I look at this column. I don't have any customer saying customer 1. So the amount is 0. Maybe John didn't buy anything, but essentially that's what a full outer join will do. It'll pull in all the rows, but you will see nulls wherever there are gaps and there was no mapping. And that's your syntax, exactly the same thing, except over here we use the keywords full outer. And now this is a special case, which is also like a stretch scenario. This is the last join that we are going to look at today before we jump into the hands-on. But this is a little more complex to wrap your head around. So it's okay if this particular one does not make complete 100% sense. But I would highly encourage that after we do our hands-on today, do visit the recording, especially for self-join, if nothing else. Because once you've done some hands-on, I feel like this will make much more sense than just like looking at it theoretically, but I'll do my best to explain it here. What is happening here is that in self-join, you would join a table to itself. So typically when you can do that is if it has two IDs, the table has two IDs, and one ID can also represent the other ID. So let's look at an example and hopefully that'll make it a little more clear. The table you see on the screen here is an employee table. So you have an ID column, which basically represents the employee ID, this one. And then you have the full name of the employee, the salary of the employee, and then the manager's ID. Now, what's a manager? Manager itself would be like an employee of the company, right? So the ID that you see here is essentially the manager's employee ID. So that's what I mean when I say there are two IDs and then one ID can actually represent the other ID. So here, for example, you have employee 1, John, whose manager is employee 3. So typically what I was doing was I would pick this ID, go into another table and try to see more information. But here I can see it within the same table. I can go to employee 3 here and see that Tom is John's manager. Tom's manager is employee ID 4, and I can go to 4 and see Anne is Tom's manager. So this is like kind of like looking into its own table to get more data. So say now what I want to do is I want the manager name to be displayed here, but the name is tied to an employee. So this is a case where I would use a self join. And this is the result that we are looking for. So we want the employee ID, employee's name, manager ID, and manager's name. So what happens here is, since I'm joining, like if you look select from employees table, I'm joining to the same table. And I was talking about you giving like table name dot column name to pull the columns. In this case, because the table names are same, SQL would get confused, like which of those tables are you wanting to pull the information from in self-join. So what we do is we rename the table. This is exactly like the alias thing that we were doing for columns before, but this time we are doing it to a table. So think of it as this previous table, but there are two copies, and we name them table 1, table 2. So the first copy is employee, second copy is manager. And what I'm joining on is the manager ID and ID. So basically this manager ID is being joined with this ID column. And then we start selecting the column name. So I'm like, okay, from the employee, that is the first copy of this, I'm going to get the ID, which is this column, the full name, and the manager ID. And from the second copy, I want to get the name where manager ID is mapping employee ID. So this is exactly what I was explaining here. So what it'll do, for example, look at the first case, it'll pull the ID, John Smith as full name, 10,000 as the salary. And then for the manager name here, it's gonna pick this 3, find the full name where these two map, and then pick full name from here, and then populate it over here. And you can see like John and Jane have the same manager, so that takes care of it. It populates Tom in both the rows. And this is like kind of convoluted because you're creating the same copy and then like joining it with itself. So this is where it gets a little complex. But essentially, these are your main joins that you need to know. And yeah, that's it that we'll cover for today. But before we get started with the live coding here, I want to remind you of the Slack channel we're using. For further assistance, any questions you might have later when you're practicing by yourself, any discussions, we also post like fun quiz questions there. So that's really nice. You get to interact and see how others approach the same problem. So please find the Slack channel and join us. And now you will see this link on the chat to go to our live coding platform. Okay. So this is exactly what we've been using for live coding up until now. I think you must be pretty familiar with all of this, but just to recap, we have this database, we have all our tables over here, and then you will get all these ads, which you can ignore. And then anything you want to run, you can select, run selection, and you'll get the details here. Okay, let me open.
Hey, Astha, can we just take a few questions before the coding round?
Yeah, definitely.
So the first is writing join same as full outer join or inner join?
Yeah,
Can you show an example with case and join together?
So when you, does it mean like when you write just join versus
just join? Yes.
Yeah. So when you write just join, by default, it is the inner join. So let me go back to this slide, this one. This is the one that it takes by default.
All right. After joining, is there any order to the customer ID? It doesn't seem to be in ascending order like the original table.
Yeah, there is no order if you're like just performing it like this. If you want any column to be ordered, then we will use the ASC and the DESC keywords that we've seen before.
What is the difference between manager ID and ID?
Oh, so over here, manager ID is basically like, say this is a company's database and John is an employee, and every employee in a company will have an ID associated to them, right? Like a unique identifier. So John's ID is 1, and John's manager is also an employee whose employee ID is 3. So you can see here, employee ID 3 is Tom. So you can infer that Tom is John's manager. So that's the difference. Essentially, it's employee ID, but it just signifies that employee 3, 4, and 1 are also managers of some other employees. That's it.
Yeah, just I think 2 more. What does the capitalized employee refer to in from employees employee? Same with employees manager. I think on the next slide where there is a query. Yeah, so what does the capital employee? I think it's the table, employees is the table.
Employees is the table, and then employee and manager are aliases that we are giving to that table, because we are creating 2 copies of the same table to be joined together. So this is just
the last is, can we implement an outer join in a self join?
You can do multiple joins. So you can have 2 table, 1 table actually in a self join with itself, and then you can do an outer join with some other table. So yes, you can have multiple tables joining, and you can also join them in different ways. Like if I have 2 tables joining by left, doesn't mean the third one has to be a left as well. It can be a right too.
Thank you, Astha. We can go ahead to the coding part now.
Okay, awesome. So let me start putting the questions here, and then we can work through them. So we'll start with the types of joins, and oops, I'll comment it up. And then we will get into more complex things after join. So the first one's here, it says get all province ID and province names from which we've had any patients. So this would use the patients table. So, and then there is a province names table, which has the province ID and province names. So to work on this, again, breaking it down, always starting with select and a from, and I know that I want to access the patients table. And then the next thing is province names. I want to get province ID and province names from which we've had any patient. So think of it this way, like we could have provinces from which we've not had any patients. But if I start with my patients table, that means that I'm taking all the rows of the patient. So any patients I've had, and then I can map it to which provinces they came from, which is why I would go with a left join here, because I want to start with the patients table, and patients is the table on the left. And then I can join it to province names. That's the table. And then in the on, I will select the common ID. Remember, we always want to join tables on IDs. So I would join it on the common ID that exists between both patients table and province names. Any guesses in the chat? Which ID would that be? That is common in province names and the patients table. You can type it on the chat. Yep, that's right. I see some province IDs coming in. So to pull province ID now, I would have to do, when I'm pulling from the patients table, I would use the table name dot, and then the column name that I'm pulling, which is province ID. And then I want to pull the same column, but this time from the province names table. So I'll use the same format, table name dot column name for the province ID. Okay, so now we've joined the patients table and the province names. And then from the question, we can see I want to get province ID and province names from this. So if I go and look at province names, I have both the columns there. So I can pull these two columns from this table, but now this is not just the single table I'm working with. This is in a joined format. So I can do this, or I can even like use it from the patients, right? For the ID. So the ID I can pull from here, and then name I can pull from here. So anything you can do because it is a joined table now. So let's see, I'll try with province names here. So from this table, I'm going to pull the ID. And then from the same table, I'm going to pull the province name. And it's this might be a syntax issue. If you're facing, just make sure that this is right, because this is a little confusing that the table name province names has a column name province name. So this is plural and this is singular. And sometimes that just gives an error. But
yes, so there are, I think, 2 questions on the chat relating regarding the question you're currently solving.
okay.
So, sorry, 2 questions in the Q&A box. Could you just check that out? So one question is, could you explain why left join is used for this particular question?
Yeah, so left join is used because now I have a patients table, which has all the patients that I've ever had, and province tables, which has nothing to do with whether I had a patient from that province or not. So actually, let me just open this province names table. So you see what it has. It just gives you the province ID and province name. It has nothing to do with whether I had a patient or any information. It's just a few rows. And the reason I use left join was because my question says that I want the province details from which we've had any patient. So even if I had like one single patient from a province, I need its name. But I could have had provinces. Maybe I did not have any patient from, say, New Brunswick. And so if I do a right join, say hypothetically, I could get New Brunswick because it'll pick on my right table, but then I'll have 0 patients. But I don't want that. I want at least one patient from any province that I'm picking. So which is why I'm using left join. So you think about it as in terms of like the result that you want to see, and then you choose your join from there. Was there a second question, Sneha?
So the second question is, after joining, is there any order to the customer ID? Because the persons are saying that it doesn't seem to be in ascending order like the original table.
Yeah, it will not be. If you want to order anything, you can like put an order by here and then order it by whatever column you want to order it by. So there will not be a default order. You will have to specify which column you want to order by.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm assuming that really helped the audience. So if anyone has any follow-up questions, please do ask that in the Q&A.
Okay, cool. So going back to the result of this question, now I just want you to see what happens when I do this, because I'm getting so many province IDs and province names. This is because I could have had multiple patients from Ontario, and I just want to get like singular values. Like I just want to see the provinces from which I had any patients. And so any guesses on what keyword would come? There's something that comes by after select to kind of make everything unique and not have duplicates. Yes, I see good answers on the chat. So it is distinct. Anytime you want to remove these kind of duplicates from your result. You've used it before, but you can see here, we have patients from all of these provinces. And actually the guess that I was doing on the last table, we don't have any patient from New Brunswick. So if I'd done a right join, it would be an issue. That is why, like, because I wanted to start with patients, that's why I did the left join here. Okay, let's try another one. And sometimes I just like this will be something that'll come more naturally once you start practicing more joins. But the intent of left join here is only because I mentioned patients first. Say I replace this and mention province names first and patients second, I would want to use a right join because I want to start with patients. So a left or right depends on which table you want to start with and whether it's placed before or after the join statement. So you could potentially get the same answer just by flipping the join and flipping the order of these tables. Okay, let's try another one. Do we have any provinces from which we do not have any patients? This is something I was going to get at, but this is exactly a situation where we can do what we were just seeing. So start with select from, I'm going to actually copy the same thing from above. I'm going to look at patients. And then I'm going to do a right join on province names instead of left. So I did not change the order of these tables. I'm just changing the join here. So instead of starting from patients, I'm starting with the province names. And I'm going to use the exact same thing. Actually, I could have copied the whole thing again. I just want to show you what we get. This is exactly the same as above. The only thing I've changed is made a left to a right. And province ID. Oh, interesting. Oh, okay. I see what's happening. I pulled everything from province names, so we can't see what's missing. So we want to pull one thing from patients table and one thing from province name table to see if there's anything different when we were pulling the information. So you can see here what happens is, let me go back to the query again, because there was this confusion with the query, but we started with province names instead of patients, right? And then I'm joining on the province ID. And what I'm doing is from patients table, I'm picking on province ID, and from province names table, I'm picking on the province name. So you get, because we started from province name and it's a right join, it picks all the provinces from the writer table, right? And then from the left table, it's only going to pick on what mapped, and anything that did not map, it's not going to pick. So from the patients table, there were no patients that mapped to New Brunswick, Northwest Territories, and like all of these last 5 values. So if the question says, do we have any provinces from which we do not have any patients, we know that it's these last 5 because we didn't get any province ID from the patients table there. Okay. So let's try a last one, which is about joins and pulling the column names, and then we'll get into doing more complex things after join is done.
Hey, Astha, there's a question.
Hi. Okay.
Yeah, can we use a where statement here to filter out null
Yeah.
province IDs?
Yes, let's try that. Where patients dot province ID. Yep. So you'll just get this then. So you can use it. Essentially, do we have any provinces would be a yes, and this is what you would get. But the reason I didn't do filtering was to show you how the columns are being pulled, and we're actually going to do those cases in the questions ahead. So
just one more question. I think in the previous question, someone wants you to repeat again, like why is it a left join in the first one?
in this one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what the left join is doing, let me go back to the slide. What your left join is doing here is it's pulling everything from your first table. This is the table that you named before the join. And then from the right table, it is just pulling those values where the ID is common. So in the example here, it took everything from the left table, and then in the right, it just looked at customer ID 3 and 5, right? To pull the amount. So those were the only amounts that you pulled. Now let's look at this question. It says, give me all the province IDs and province names from which we've had any patients. So from which we've had any patients, this means that I want to start with the patient's data, because for province data, I could have any number of provinces. Like province data just gives me an abbreviation for a province and then the detailed name of the province. I might or might not have a patient from that province. But my question says I want to get only those provinces, which is the right table, where we have had some patients from, which is the left table. So since I'm starting from the left table, that's why I use the left join here. Was there any other question, Mansi?
I think just one more. That is, could you do an inner join to get the same result?
Over here?
Yeah, I think the second question, the right join one.
If you do an inner join, let me show you what happens. So you see, you don't get any nulls. Why that is happening is because when you did an inner join, you only got the rows which were common between both the tables. But again, like going back to the question, I want to find provinces from which I don't have any patients. So I want to see those null values over there. So which is why I would use the right join. If you do an inner, it'll not give you anything. It'll just pick on the common and you'll miss out on the fact that there were provinces from which you didn't have any patients. So that's why the null rows are important here. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Astha.
Cool. So, okay, since we've already covered inner joins and we have 15 minutes, let me get to the question where it's about like using filtering that you've already done before, and aggregations after join is done. So let me remove this. Okay. So what I want is, I want to see the patient ID, the first name, the last name from patients whose diagnosis is dementia. And this is just like a helper for you, that the primary diagnosis is stored in the admissions table. So just for clarity here, we've already seen what the patient's table looks like. Let me open the admissions table just to show you what it looks like. So you have a patient ID, admission date, discharge date, diagnosis, and which doctor was attending to the patient. So this column is important to me because I want the patients whose diagnosis is dementia, right? So that is like one of the filters that we would use. And then I want the patient ID, the first name, the last name. So this will probably come from the patient's table, and then the diagnosis will come from the admissions table. So now that we have that, I'm going to leave out the left and right. Now we're just like going to look at, I'm just going to use join, which is the inner join, because the focus now is like, once we have a join table, what can we do with it? So we're going to do a select from patient's table, and then I want to join it on admissions table. Now, what I join two tables on is I want to find a common ID between patients here and admissions here. What is the common ID between these two tables? Any guesses? You can put them on the chat. patient ID. Yes, that is correct. So from admissions, I'm going to use the table name dot column name format. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the patients table. And over here, the order does not matter. So if you're wondering, what if I did, instead of admissions.patient ID equals patients.patient ID, what if I flipped it? I did a patients.patient ID equals admissions.patient ID. It does not matter. You can do that as well. It just is giving an indication to SQL that this is the column that you need to join on. Okay, so now I want the column patient ID, which I can get from the patients table. First name is also in the patients table. Last name is also on the patients table. So since I'm pulling it now from a joined table, I'll have to give the table name and then dot, and then the column name that I'm pushing. So that's patients dot patient ID. Then from the same table, I want to pull the first name. From the same table, I want to pull the last name. And then let's see, I don't want to pull diagnosis here, but I'm going to just like pull it to see what we're getting after a join, right? So this diagnosis is coming from the admissions table that we saw here. Okay, so we have all the columns, we've made the join. Let's see the result that we get. Okay, so I'm getting the patient ID, the first name, the last name, and then I have all of these diagnoses. What am I missing here to get the result to this question? There's just one row that is missing. Any guesses? You can put them on the chat. Yes, that's correct. Good job. So I'm going to put a where condition because I want the diagnosis to only be that of dementia. And now what I have here, I have patient ID, first name, last name, and diagnosis. So I have every patient's, all diagnoses of every patient, right? But once I filter on this, I'm just going to get those patients that had dementia. And in the results, it says show patient ID, first name, last name. It does not ask you to show the diagnosis here. This was just to show you that this is the result that we're getting. So you would ideally, this would be the right answer. If you were in an interview, for example, you wouldn't want this column in your query. So this is the result that you would get. Okay, so this was an example of how you can use filtering along with your join. So once the join is made, so the first thing you would focus on is joining, finding the column, common ID column, and then you would look at, okay, what next manipulation are we trying to do in this? Let's take another example of a similar thing, but this time, instead of just filtering, you would use more concepts, especially from last Friday's session. So this time you want to display the total number of patients from each province. And then we're also using an order by, so you will see how you can order by with joins for some of the questions that we had. So I want to get the total number of patients. So that gives me an idea that there is some aggregation that's going to happen from each of the province. So this is, remember the aggregation within categories that we were discussing last time. So total number of patient within the category of province, and then you're going to do an order by. Now the patient column has a patient ID and a province ID, but I want to get the province name in the result. So which table would you go to link this patient's table to? Which table will join to this? You can put it on the chat.
As a quick question in the Q&A section, someone is asking, okay, Undine is asking, do you no longer have to specify that diagnosis comes from the admissions table?
It is coming from the admissions table. I'm not pulling that diagnosis anywhere. Oh, And over here in this filtering, this is a good point. Ideally, you would want admissions dot diagnosis. So what happened and why this query ran is because diagnosis was only present in the admissions table. It was not present in patients table, right? So SQL is not confused about, oh, you want me to pull this column, but from which table do you want me to pull it? But if you have a column name, like if you have column names which are present in both the columns, then SQL gets confused. So the dot notation is more of like the ascending descending thing we've talked about, where it's not necessary if the column name is unique in the tables that you've joined, but it's a good practice. So this is something that happens, which like SQL will still run, but as a good practice, it's always nice to put a table name and a dot. Okay, so I see some good answers in the chat, which is that we want to link patients to the province names table because patient ID is column. So let's start this with, I'm going to select from patients. And then I'm going to join on the province names table. And the common ID is patient ID. So I'm going to do a table name dot column name. And then I'm going to do a province names table name dot. Oh, actually, sorry, not the patient ID. It's going to be the province ID this time. Okay, so I'm joining by this province ID and patient's name and province ID and province names. So one of the things I mentioned in the slides, but I haven't done in the hands-on so far, is every time you want to like, you're putting the table name dot column name, table name dot column name, and sometimes it just becomes, you have like, you're doing with multiple column selection and it just becomes a lot to type. So that is where you can use these aliases. So I can call patients as say PA, and then I can call the province names as PR. So now if I'm selecting a column, say I'm selecting province name, I don't have to do province names dot province name. I can just reduce this to the alias. So I can do a PR dot province name. Okay. So it says display the total number of patients from each province. We have a PR.province name. What is the function that we use to get the total number of patients here? Any guesses? You can put them on the chat. Count, that's right. So I want to count, and I want to count the patient. So I can say, give me PA dot patient ID. And then now this is, I'm using an aggregation, but I'm missing something here for that aggregation to work. Yes, I already see that on the chat, group by is coming. So that's right. I'm going to group by, and then what I want to group by is my province ID. So in every province, I'm gonna create category of the province name, and then I'm gonna of the province ID or name. It's 1-to-1 for now, and then I'm gonna get the count of patients from each province. So if I run this, oh, patients does not have a province ID. Wait, what? Did I make a spelling mistake? Oh, I see what I did. I think this would solve it. Let's see. Yeah, so you see what happened. I named it as alias. I named patients as PA. I named province names as PR. And so now SQL is just looking at those aliases. But during the join, I gave the full table name. But now SQL is referencing to them as aliases. So SQL is confused, like, what are you trying to do? But once I switch that to the alias name, then it works. So now I get every province's name, and then I get the count of patients from each province. But I also want to order it by descending. So this in an interview wouldn't give you full marks because you're missing on one of the things that the question is asking. So what goes in the last line to make this accurate? Any guesses on the chat? Order by, that is correct. And also another thing which we noticed was this ugly function name which comes in. So I'm going to just say this is my total patients. And then I'm going to order by and there you go. And now one of the things that is missing is this is ordering, but as we know by default, it does ascending. And so I just need to put a DESC here. And then this gives you the province name and then the number of patients that we have in each province.
This small question, we had that multiple times in last session as well, but would count star work as well?
Yeah, count star would work here because you're not trying to do any distinct. You're just essentially what patient ID is doing is also counting just the number of rows. And so count star would work here.
Why do we have to alias things and what is the benefit?
The only benefit of alias is, say I remove this from here, right? And now if I run the same thing, you see the total patients that it says. If I'm using that alias name, so I'll remove that. So you see how this thing does not make sense. Now think of a situation where, like, say you're working in a company and you're collaborating on code with other team members. And this happens a lot where you will have like numerical columns and the column name does not make sense at all because it's a function. So ideally you would want to aliases, one, so that it does not look like this, but two, also to basically the idea of naming columns is to give an idea to someone who's looking at this table for the first time, what this column even means, right? So this, if you didn't know this code, if you weren't attending this session and you just see this table for the first time, you'll be like, what does this even mean? And maybe you know SQL, so with the count, you can like kind of guess. But if someone's just looking at this table here, then you can see, okay, this is the province and these are the total number of patients I have from that province. So it's kind of a two purpose, one to make it look neater, to give the column some meaning. Okay, so we're at time. There is one more question. Mansi, what would you like if we can do it here, or we could post it on the Slack channel and have people take a stab at it?
I think Slack would be nice, and like people
Yeah.
can like see what other people are doing also.
I agree. That'll be amazing. Okay, so if you've not joined the Slack channel yet, let me go back to this slide. Please join this channel. I'll post this question tonight, and so we'll give 24 hours for everyone to take a stab at it, and then you can see how others are approaching it, and then we'll post the solution in say 24 hours.